there that we vigorously prosecute this as a case of domestic terrorism. This cannot be tolerated in a free society. We stand on the rule of law.
That was the mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, Mike Signer, on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper earlier today, speaking on those violent protests in Virginia yesterday. This while the Department of Justice here in Washington opens a formal civil rights investigation into the circumstances surrounding the car that plowed into that crowd of protesters, killing a 32-year-old paralegal from Charlottesville, Virginia, Heather Heyer, 32 years old. Also this morning, the White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert said both he and President Trump want the suspect to face, quote, swift justice. Bossert also defended President Trump's statement on the deadly rally in which he condemned violence on, quote, many sides.
How many people did the counter-protesters kill yesterday, Mr. Bossert?
Well, I'll tell you, one death is too many, Jake. And,
but that wasn't by the counter-protesters. The victim was a counter-protester. The victim was a counter-protester. Hold on one moment, Jake. I don't for 1 minute. I don't for one moment, and I won't allow you for 1 second to put me in a position of being an apologist for somebody who is now a charged murderer. This individual should face swift justice. The President of the United States shares that view. I know he does. I share that view deeply, and I don't want to be put in a position. I won't allow you to put me or him in a position of not finding that justice as swiftly as possible. You just decried both sides.
Probably for a moment.
You just decried both sides. Here we have a situation, Mr. Bossert, where neo-Nazis, the Klan, alt-right, and others went to Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting anti-Semitic, anti-African-American, and other racist slogans, provoking the people of Charlottesville, Virginia, making them feel intimidated. Yes, violence did break out. One person was killed by one of these alt-right Klan Nazi protesters, and you just decried both sides of this, and this is the issue.
No, I didn't, and you're making this issue a little bit distorted. So what I would decry is the individual that committed murder yesterday. What I would do, though, is quibble with this notion that any of this is acceptable. These groups showed up spewing hate. These groups showed up looking for violence.
What groups?
I think it's just important for people to understand.
What groups are you referring to?
Of course, the groups that showed well, I refer to the groups that clashed yesterday. I think it was pretty graphically evident.
Tom Bossert speaking with Jake Tapper on State of the Union earlier today. Tom Bossert, the President's Homeland Security Advisor. My next guest is the Vice Mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, Wes Bellamy, who's joining us now. Vice Mayor, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Let me first express all of our deep condolences for what has taken place in your beautiful community. How is your community, Vice Mayor, responding to the horrific incident that we all saw yesterday?
Well, before I get started, I'd like to express my deepest condolences to those who've lost family members over the weekend. For that, I am truly saddened, really sorry about all of that, and I'm hoping that our community can rally around not only these white supremacist domestic terrorist attacks, but making sure that we stand together. Now, when you ask how's my community doing, I think it's a tale of two cities. I think yesterday people were rather sad because of everything that was going on, angry, upset, but on the other hand, I literally saw 150 book bags handed to people throughout the community by a group of young black men and young black women at Tonsler Park, which is a park within the traditional African American community. They had free food, they had music, they gave back. They made sure that the community was well squared and taken care of, and that represents Charlottesville. Not the Ku Klux Klans, not these white supremacist groups who decide that they can come here and think that they can intimidate us, because it doesn't work. But what we are is a community that's resilient. We stand together, and we will be better because of this. I can guarantee, and I bet my life on it. We will survive this, and we will be all right. I know it.
As you know, some of these white supremacist groups, these neo-Nazi groups, they're expected to continue making themselves visible there in Charlottesville. In fact, throughout the week and weeks to come, they say. Is there a plan to have a larger police presence during what are expected to be more of these protests? What do you think?
Well, I'm sure that these individuals are going to want to come back and mask their hate and what they describe as free speech, but we will be prepared. I understand that we are going to have, again, more protests, more people who want to come, but Charlottesville isn't the only city that'll be facing this issue. This has now become a nationwide issue when you see these white supremacist attacks under the guidance of their president, number 45. They have become empowered and emboldened, but we are not going to tolerate it. We're not going to stand for it. They can continue to come, but our community will not break. Again, the people here of Charlottesville, white people, black people, yellow people, old people, young people, we're a community that rallies and rides together. This is a community that I saw pick me up on my darkest and deepest moments to encourage me, and I see they've done the same thing for other people. We're a resilient group, and sometimes we may get knocked down, but we always stand back up. That's who Charlottesville is, and that's who we're going to continue to be. Now, I hope that 45 will come out and condemn these white supremacist groups. Was listening right before this, the individuals in his cabinet refused to call them what they are, white supremacist groups. Our governor has done so. We're calling on every elected official throughout the country to condemn these actions, as well as condemn these white supremacy groups, and let them know that this will not be tolerated.
Well, when you say 45, you mean President Trump. What specifically, Vice Mayor, do you want to hear him say?
I want him to condemn the white supremacist groups. I don't know if I can be any clearer than that. He came out with a statement yesterday in which I thought was nowhere near what it should be, talking about we've had these issues forever. Water is wet. We've known we've had these issues forever. We've known we've had them for a long time. We know that it's going to take us all to come together. We're working on that. But what we need him to do from the highest office of the land is to come out and condemn them. Again, when you have an individual like David Duke, leader of the Ku Klux Klans, come out and say that they are here to fulfill the dream and the promise from their president, what more do you need to hear? He needs to denounce these individuals if he wants to truly bring this country together. I can assure you that we're doing everything that we can here in Charlottesville, and I know others are doing things in other places. And look, I want to be clear. No one's perfect. I've done things in my past that I'm not proud of, but we grow from them. And this is an opportunity for our president to grow into the leader that he needs to be in that office. So 45, we're looking for your leadership. Condemn the white supremacist attacks. Condemn these domestic terrorists. Tell them to leave. You're their leader. Stand up.
You're referring to some of the criticism, the attacks you've received for some racist, homophobic viewpoints from many years ago. Tell our viewers about that, what your response has been, how you learned from that.
Sure. So, I mean, I have no qualms with talking about the issues that I've had when I was 22, 23, 24 years old, but that's part of the reason why I love this city. Last year, we addressed the tweets from before, and I apologize to the entire city. And again, I thank this city for helping me grow into the young man that I am today. I'm no longer the 22-year-old, somewhat ignorant young man that I once was before. I'm a 30-year-old father, a husband of 3, a community leader, a person who works with all kinds of communities, whether it's LGBTQ, white people, Asian people, whomever. I teach kids from all different communities and different shades and socioeconomic status, and much of that is attributed to the people here. This isn't a joke. This isn't a game. We've matured a great deal, and I've grown a lot because of the people here, and that's why I believe that this city is so resilient. That's why I know that we will survive this, because the people here are not going to tolerate it. But again, I'm not here to place blame on anyone. What I'm just looking for is simple leadership, because our community is going to heal. Our community will move forward, but will the country be able to do the same? And that's what we're hoping for.
One final question, Vice Mayor, before I let you go. What's going to happen to that Confederate statue of Robert E. Lee in your community? It's supposed to go down, but I take it it's under litigation right now. What's the status?
Yes. So it's under litigation right now. We'll be going to court to hear from our local judge to render his ruling in regards to whether or not he believes that we have the rights to be able to move it or not. But I hope everyone can see that this is more than just about a statue. These white supremacists are using the statue to mask their hate and come down here to do what they want to do in order to invoke fear. And if that is the rallying point you've seen now on several different occasions, Richard Spencer brought his group of minions here to have a torch lit rally with tiki torches from Walmart, because they thought that would scare us. Then you have these clowns from Unite the Right come down here yesterday with their mob mentality and think that they can scare us. And there'll be other groups. We had the Ku Klux Klan come and try to do the same thing. So I'm hoping that our judges as well as the state can see people are using the statue as a way to spread their hate, and it needs to be moved. We cannot be a city of equity, inclusion, and equality with a 28-foot statue to a person who, if he was alive while I'm in this position right now, would probably want me beaten, who wouldn't want me to look him in the eye. I've been told from all these people that they want to hang me from a tree and they're going to do this and that. In my opinion, that statue needs to be removed because it doesn't represent the heritage that some is saying, but it represents more of hate. And in this city, this is not a hateful one. This is an equitable one. At least we're getting to move there. So let's move it.
And it's the home of a great world-class university, the University of Virginia as well.
Indeed.
Wes Bellamy, the Vice Mayor of Charlottesville, thanks very much for joining us.
Dr. Bellamy, but thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to go back to Charlottesville in just a moment, take a closer look at exactly what the white supremacist groups there are up to right now, who's protesting, what their message of hate is all about. Stay with us.
Pain used to shut me down during pickup games.
The president has been slammed with growing backlash for his failure to specifically call out white supremacists after that atrocious attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. President Trump said many sides are responsible for the fatal rally, but many Republicans are saying that's not enough. Here's Senator Cory Gardner on the State of the Union earlier today.
Well, this is not a time for vagaries. This isn't a time for innuendo or to allow room to be read between the lines. This is a time to lay blame on bigotry, to lay blame on white supremacists, on white nationalism, and on hatred. And that needs to be said. This president has done an incredible job of naming terrorism around the globe as evil, radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's in Europe or the Middle East. He has said and called it out time and time again, and this president needs to do exactly that today. Call this white supremacism, this white nationalism evil, and let the country hear it, let the world hear it. It's something that needs to come from the Oval Office, and this White House needs to do it today.
Let's go to our White House correspondent, Athena Jones. She's joining us now from Bridgewater, New Jersey. She's covering the president not very far away right now. He's continuing what he calls his working vacation. Athena, what else? What is the latest? What has been the reaction, the official reaction from the president, if any, today?
Hi, Wolf. Well, we have not heard from the president today. I was just checking his Twitter feed to see if he's tweeted just in the last few minutes, and he has not. So no word on exactly what he's up to. But we did hear from his daughter, Ivanka Trump, on Twitter earlier this morning. She is, of course, a senior advisor to the president. Here is what she tweeted earlier today. She said there should be no place in society for racism, white supremacy, and neo-Nazis. We must all come together as Americans and be one country, united. Hashtag Charlottesville. Now, this morning, we also heard from a White House official who put out a statement that went further than what we heard directly from the president yesterday. Let me read that statement as well. The White House official said the president said very strongly in his statement yesterday that he condemns all forms of violence, bigotry, and hatred. And of course, that includes white supremacists, KKK, neo-Nazi, and all extremist groups. He called for national unity and bringing all Americans together. And I just want to note one more thing we heard this morning on State of the Union from the White House's Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert. He, after being pressed repeatedly by Jake Tapper, said, I condemn white supremacists and racists and white Nazi groups and all the other groups that espouse this kind of hatred. But what's interesting here, Wolf, is that these words that we're now hearing from Tom Bossert, from an unnamed White House official, and from the president's daughter all go much further than what the president said yesterday. And that is what has drawn all of this condemnation from not just Democrats, but also from Republicans like Senator Cory Gardner. And it is a growing list of Republicans, allies of the president, who want to see him do more. And what's also interesting here, Wolf, is that the president had a chance to respond directly, to go a little further. The press who were there for that brief appearance before the media yesterday tried to ask him questions as he was leaving the room, shouting specifically whether he wants the support of white nationalists. The president clearly heard those questions and chose to ignore them. For the remainder of the day, I and my colleagues pressed White House officials for more on why the president made the statement in the way that he did. I asked several people where he stands on white nationalism, and it took until today to get some sort of answer. And so I think that there are going to be a lot of people who still aren't satisfied and won't be satisfied until they hear the president himself condemn these white nationalists and white supremacists who staged these demonstrations yesterday.
Well, he could easily do that. There's a pool of reporters, including you. There's camera crews over there in New Jersey. He could go out and make a statement, or at a minimum, he could simply retweet Ivanka Trump's tweet. He hasn't done that either. But here's something that's perplexing. The statement that the White House put out simply, as you point out, quotes an unnamed White House official. Do we know who that official is? Why is that official unnamed? Why doesn't somebody come forward and specifically say this is a statement from the press secretary or a statement from the chief of staff? Why is this an unnamed official making such an important statement?
That's the question we're all asking here as well, Wolf. No answer so far. It seems to me that, or it seems to many of us, that if the White House is trying to perhaps clean this up a bit, seeing the reaction that the president's remarks got yesterday, that they would go further and at least attach someone's name to it because it has more force that way. This is really what it all comes down to. This is why there's so much criticism of President Trump himself, because it's a bully pulpit for a reason, a lot of folks would say, and they argue that the president isn't showing leadership. He talks about wanting to unite the country, to bring people together, and yet won't specifically talk about the facts on the ground that led to the violence we saw unfolding on the streets of Charlottesville yesterday. So it is curious to have this White House official not wanting to put their name to this statement.
Yeah, very curious indeed. But if the president does want to make a statement, of course, all the major TV networks, all the cable networks, we will be there. We'll have live coverage of any statement that the president is ready to make if he decides in the coming hours to go before the cameras, as so many people, including many Republicans, are strongly urging him to do. The fact he hasn't done it yet, raising a lot more questions. Athena, we'll get back to you as soon as you get word if the president will make a statement. We'll get right back to you as well. Thanks very, very much. Coming up, we're going to speak to someone on the ground in Charlottesville, Virginia, who was at the rally and saw a
Remember, this week started with reports scrutinizing President Trump's vacation. He denied it actually was a vacation. He said he was hard at work. And then he started holding events on camera, perhaps to give TV networks something to show. At one of the Q&As he had with the press, Trump was asked to comment on special investigator Robert Mueller. And the Washington Post scoop that Mueller's team and FBI agents raided former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort's home. Here is some of what Trump said in response.
I thought it was a very, very strong signal or whatever.
So many folks on TV try to figure out, what did he mean, strong signal? To me, it sounded like, well, like this.
It certainly shows that Mueller's team is not afraid to make a big statement.
It sends a pretty strong message that it's a serious investigation.
The raid could have been a signal to Paul Manafort that they have something and they're trying to zero in on him.
I thought it was a very, very strong signal or whatever.
See what I mean? I think the president was saying what he heard on television, talking like a cable news talking head. Back with me now, two people that are much more than just talking heads. Ann Compton, former White House correspondent for ABC News, and Rear Admiral John Kirby was Pentagon and State Department spokesman, now a CNN military and diplomatic analyst. And is it possible, I'm onto something here, the idea that the president, he hears something from cable news, he picks it up from television, and then he shares it as if he's just a removed, passive observer?
Well, I'll tell you what worries me about the press coverage and the news coverage of this whole very complex and interrelated story. There has been a move by the administration to crack down on leaks. And while you can understand an administration wanting to protect secret information, I hope there's not a chilling effect on not only the reporters working in Washington, but working on all aspects of this story. Because the more the American people know about the elements going into this, the clearer picture and the better context Americans will have to decide for themselves where the story is leading and who has been who they believe.
And new leaks every day. John, when you were at the Pentagon, didn't you have to chase down leakers?
Sure, we did, and at the Pentagon and at the State Department, somewhat, not so much. But President Obama was very tough on leaks, and they are dangerous. And look, and I wrote about this Friday night. I'm worried about the leak that led to the Washington Post story on Tuesday. Again, it's a good story. Nothing against the Post moving forward with it, but leaking details of a classified assessment about North Korea's ability to miniaturize put in motion a lot of what we saw over this last week, this frenetic energy and all this heated rhetoric. And I think we need to all sit back a little bit and think about that for just a moment. But yeah, look, leaks are never okay, at least classified leaks. I mean, there's all kinds of different types. But when you're putting out confidential and classified information, that's against the law. And the president is right to be angry about that, and his attorney general is right to launch an investigation on that. I think we do need to look at that seriously, but I am concerned that Anne's right. I mean, you also don't want to stifle whistleblowers who have legitimate complaints about government and processes either.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I appreciate it. Up next, a new poll that really stunned me. Maybe it surprised you too. We have two top fact checkers standing by to react to trust and the president's trust deficit.
Business Connected.
We're determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
That was former Klan leader David Duke yesterday morning in Charlottesville, Virginia. A number of Republicans have condemned President Trump yesterday for not calling out white supremacists and members of the Klan who have this mindset. Among the first on Twitter was Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado, who joins me now. Senator, thanks for joining us. You had some tough words for President Trump on Saturday. Let me show our viewers what you tweeted. Quote, "Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. There were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism." You heard Tom Bossert, the Homeland Security Advisor of the President, arguing that the President did condemn it. What do you think?
Well, this is not a time for vagaries. This isn't a time for innuendo or to allow room to be read between the lines. This is a time to lay blame on bigotry, to lay blame on white supremacists, on white nationalism, and on hatred. And that needs to be said. This president has done an incredible job of naming terrorism around the globe as evil, radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's in Europe or the Middle East. He has said and called it out time and time again, and this president needs to do exactly that today. Call this white supremacism, this white nationalism evil, and let the country hear it, let the world hear it. It's something that needs to come from the Oval Office, and this White House needs to do it today.
Some critics say that President Trump doesn't do this because he might believe that these white supremacists are a part of his base, not obviously his entire base, but a part of his base, and he doesn't want to risk alienating them. What do you think? Why is the reason? What is the reason that he won't condemn them, call them domestic terrorists, call them white supremacists?
White nationalists, white supremacists, they're not a part of anybody's base. They're not a part of this country. They're a part of hatred. They're a part of bigotry. They're a part of evil, and we need to stand up to that. And so whether it's the President of the United States, a senator from any of our great 50 states around the country, or our city councils and mayors, school teachers, call it for what it is. It's hatred. It's bigotry. We don't want them in our base. They shouldn't be in a base. They shouldn't be claimed as part of a base, and it has to be made crystal clear.
Yeah, but why won't the President do that the way you just did?
Yeah. Well, again, I encourage the president to do that. This president has done so when people have driven trucks through crowds in Europe. He's called it radical Islamic terrorism. He should use this opportunity today to say this is terrorism, this is domestic terrorism, this is white nationalism, and it has to stop. And I encourage the president to do so. He has a chance to do that. The healing power of the White House, the ability to lead of the president of the United States, it needs to be seen today. Yes, he condemned bigotry and hatred, but we need to name evil and call evil and name it. And in this case, it is clearly bigotry, hatred, racism, and the white nationalists who led to death and murder in Charlottesville.
With respect, Senator, you're not answering my question. Why do you think he doesn't do it? I mean, is it sending a dog whistle? I mean, you heard me quote the neo-Nazi website to Tom Bossert earlier. There are neo-Nazis out there who say, oh, great, he wasn't condemning us specifically. Do you think that was the intention of the president?
I think the president needs to step up today and say what it is and call it for what it is. It's evil, it's white nationalism, it's bigotry, and it's unacceptable. And if he doesn't do that, then we can continue to answer the question of why. But I believe he has a chance to do that today. Ivanka called this white nationalism. She called it out today. The president needs to do so as well.
You were on the front end of Republican criticism of this yesterday, but I have to say, Donald Trump on this show, February 2016, refused to condemn or disavow in any way David Duke, the Klan, white supremacists. Are you really surprised that a year and a half later, his refusal to call out white supremacists is out there and it's an issue? I mean, it's the same thing he showed a year and a half ago on this show.
Well, I think that is why today the president needs to make it very clear, while calling out racism, while calling out bigotry, that he has a chance to show the American people who really is to blame for this. There is no sort of multi-dimensional facet to this evil. There's no sort of read between the lines moment that we have. The president needs to stand up and say, just as he has in places around the globe, this is domestic terrorism, it is unacceptable, and it was led by people who thrive on hate and thrive on racism, and it's unacceptable in the United States of America.
You're the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. That's the campaign arm of Senate Republicans. Do you want all Republican candidates around the country to join you in saying these were white supremacists and this was domestic terrorism?
Well, it isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This is about anybody with any common sense, decency, and dignity for human life and the values that we hold as a country, our constitutional rights. This is about Republicans, Democrats, Greens, anybody in between to say this is wrong. We don't stand for that. This country has made great mistakes in the past that led to a civil war. We've overcome them. We've apologized for them. And we should continue to do everything we can in our power to never let them happen again. And yes, there is pain that remains. And yes, there are great mistakes that we still make as a nation, but we cannot let them go unanswered. We can't let them go unlabeled, and we can't let them go unnoticed. We have to admit them, we have to make up for them, and then we have to do what is right. And that's what this country can do today. That's what the president can do today. And I would encourage him to do what he has done around the globe, calling out people for their acts of evil. Let's do it today. White nationalists, white supremacists, we will not stand for their racism, their bigotry, and their hatred.
On Saturday, President Trump said that we must all, quote, cherish our history. Tom Perriello is a former Democratic congressman from Charlottesville. He heard that as a dog whistle. He tweeted, quote, we must all cherish our history. Did Donald J. Trump just dog whistle support for the Klan's main goal of the hate rally, i.e. to protest the Lee statue, the statue of Robert E. Lee? Did you hear cherish our history as a dog whistle, Senator?
You know, I did not hear the statement, but what I will share with you is something that I read, reread for the Marion Kanishi, who was a Japanese interned in Colorado, 18-year-old valedictorian of an internment camp in Colorado during a very dark time of our history when we took U.S. citizens and put them into internment camps. In her statement, in her valedictorian speech that she gave at this Colorado internment camp, she said, this is a country that has learned from its past and it has made up for those mistakes. And that's exactly what we have to do. We have to learn from our history. And we have to make sure that we look at those moments in history and say, yes, that happened in this country, but we can no longer allow it to happen. And I hope that's what he meant. I didn't hear that statement, but what we have to do in this country is recognize the mistakes of our past and that we as a great nation will learn from them and move on from them and not repeat them. It's Governor Chris Christie, who you cited earlier today, once said, it's hard to hate up close. And that's what we have to do in this nation. We have to realize that we cannot allow that hate to fester. It's hard to hate up close. Let's get to know our communities. Let's get to know one another. Let's get to know the issues that drive all of us. And then we can overcome this hate that seems to be festering right now, and why this president needs to say, enough is enough. Hatred, racism will not be tolerated.
Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, thank you so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marine General Joseph Dunford, is set to meet with South Korean President Moon Jae-in tomorrow. The focus of the meeting, of course, will be North Korea. After nearly a week of threatening to rain down fire and fury on North Korea, President Trump may be turning to diplomacy. Trump spoke to China's president late Friday night to urge the Chinese to do more to try to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Yesterday, he spoke with the French President Macron to discuss further economic sanctions against the Hermit Kingdom. This came after the president urged a nonviolent solution and blamed his predecessors for failing to stop North Korea.
Nobody loves a peaceful solution better than President Trump, that I can tell you. Hopefully it'll all work out. But this has been going on for many years. Would have been a lot easier to solve this years ago.
Joining me now is the former Director of National Intelligence, retired General James Clapper. General Clapper, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me.
So you've been critical.
Welcome back. The president may call it a hoax and a lame Democratic excuse, but the Russia investigation is hitting closer and closer to home. First word of an early morning FBI raid on a home owned by former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort. That bold tactic clearly got the president's attention.
I thought it was a very, very strong signal or whatever. I know Mr. Manafort. I haven't spoken to him in a long time, but I know him. He was with the campaign, as you know, for a very short period of time, relatively short period of time, but I've always known him to be a good man. I thought that was a very, that was pretty tough stuff.
Mr. President,
to wake him up, perhaps his family was there, I think that's pretty tough stuff.
Now, we knew Manafort and the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., are under investigation for meetings and contacts with Russians. And now the New York Times is reporting that special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of possible collusion or interference includes interest in talking to current and former top West Wing staffers, including the former White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. That's the stuff that gets under the president's skin.
There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians. Look, I won because I suppose I was a much better candidate than her. I won because I went to Wisconsin. I went to Michigan. I won Pennsylvania. I fought a smart battle. That's why I win. I didn't win because of Russia. Russia had nothing to do with me winning. The thing that we had a great team, and I guess I did a good job.
We don't know where this goes. The president knows a lot more about it than we do, and his legal team does. But when you raid Paul Manafort's home, and when you're now saying we want to talk to White House officials, including the former chief of staff, about the firing of James Comey, who was in the meeting. What did the president say beforehand? What did he say after? Who else was involved in the decision? That's about potential interference or obstruction more than the collusion the president always says never happened. Again, we don't know where it's going, but we do know from just those two developments that we're at this for a while.
And we do know this is going to continue to be a major distraction for this White House. I mean, these White House officials are lowering up. They need attorneys to deal with a lot of these questions that are going to come from Bob Mueller. The president can dismiss this all he wants, but this is incredibly serious. Bob Mueller has a significant team of lawyers who are digging into this. They have a budget where they're going to go at this pretty aggressively. We're talking a lot about the issue of possible coordination, collusion. There are other meetings that have not been reported yet that that's clearly that Mueller is looking into as well. They have leads, of course, exploring these things. And the issue of obstruction is another separate issue from the whole idea of possible collusion. So the president can dismiss it all he wants, but this is very serious.
And in a White House that has recurring chaos and recurring disruption, we didn't mention, where's the chief of staff in this whole Charlottesville response? He was supposed to bring focus and discipline to the White House, but what I remember from the Clinton White House days, when Aide has to go before a grand jury or get investigated by the grand counsel, it just starts a conversation across the building that has nothing to do with what you're trying to accomplish that day.
We're in a phase now where everybody who doesn't have a lawyer is getting a lawyer or looking for a lawyer. And guess what? Like, that's no surprise. This is actually the least surprising development. We have always known that this was coming. And as you begin to see major and key staff turnovers, which you would at any White House, but usually after the 1-year mark or the 2-year mark, things are a little sped up now. But you're going to see people moving on. You've seen a couple of big ones like Reince Priebus, Sean Spicer. That makes them a different kind of target or subject for investigators to want to talk to, because when they become detached from the White House, their knowledge of the day-to-day recedes a little bit, but their knowledge of what they knew when they were there perhaps becomes easier to talk about. And even if some of these aides still feel loyalty to the president, even if they think the president didn't do anything wrong, they still have information about basic facts. Were you in the room during that meeting? What happened? What didn't happen? What was said? What wasn't said? What memos are there? And that helps the investigators to build timelines or kind of fact sheets for whatever it is that they're going toward.
And the truth is, regardless of John Kelly coming in, an investigation like this is not like regular politics. It can't be controlled. And that's what the developments of the week remind us, is that investigation marches forward, and there's no amount of political spin or whatever that's going to stop it.
To your point earlier about Republican cracks, the Republicans on Capitol Hill support Bob Mueller, support their own investigations 1,000%.
Right, they do. I mean, they as they have said a long time, they think that Mueller is pretty much beyond reproach. They support Jeff Sessions staying in place, who, you know, if he goes, that would be a way for Trump to begin to try to get rid of Mueller. And they also think that the investigation will exonerate him, but the more steps Trump takes to try to dissuade things, the more difficult he's making it for himself.
Difficulty makes it. Everybody sit tight. Our reporters share from their notebooks next, including the president's feud with the Senate Majority Leader and an endorsement that has the GOP base labeling the president a, quote, back.
So much more than
Tweeting at 8:09 this morning. There should be no place in society for racism, white supremacy, and neo-Nazis. We must all come together as Americans and be one country, united. Hashtag Charlottesville. Good for her. Good for her. And I'll say it again, good for her. But she's not the president. Where's the president?
And we don't know whether the president will retweet his daughter. Now, that is in a lot of ways how you measure what he's reading, what is getting his attention, and he has been, you know, retweeting already concern about the law enforcement officers sort of killed as part of their response yesterday. So, look, I think the next few hours really are important in terms of the White House and this president understanding the implications of that vacuum, what the reaction has been, and deciding how to step in.
And John, you know, rhetoric is important, and we've been talking a lot about what he says, but so is policy. And, you know, it wasn't that long ago before this incident that it was reported that the Department of Homeland Security, as it sort of renews some grants on combating extremism, they're refocusing towards extremism by Muslims, but dropping programs that were aimed at white nationalists and at neo-Nazis and the like. And so, you know, part of what the White House has to look at is not just what he says, but what this White House does in pursuing this kind of thing, and what that says about where, you know, kind of where this White House and this administration is.
To that point, before you jump in, I do want to note that the Attorney General of the United States got out ahead of the president late last night, approaching the 11 o'clock hour. The Attorney General issued a statement. The violence and deaths in Charlottesville strike at the heart of American law and justice. He went on to say the FBI is involved and the U.S. Attorney has started an investigation down there that potentially will look into hate crimes, maybe domestic terrorism, civil rights issues. So the Attorney General out ahead of the president. Before you jump in, I just want to say we've talked a lot about so many Republicans worried, frankly, about the direction of their party, coming out and saying, Mr. President, you fell far short. You need to say a lot more. You need to step up, call evil, evil, name names, if you will. Democrats also involved in that. Nancy Pelosi tweeting directly at the president yesterday, repeat after me, at real Donald Trump, white supremacy is an affront to American values. Again, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, not quite clear in your politics. You can't argue with that. Why does the president not embrace it?
This reminds me a lot of the whole David Duke flap during the campaign season when he was asked by Jake Tapper whether or not he would disavow white supremacist David Duke. And he said, I don't know David Duke initially, and that led to days of negative coverage. Republican after Republican at that point came out to criticize Trump, to criticize David Duke. And then the president said later when he was asked belatedly, oh, of course I disavow David Duke, but almost in a flippant way, not as direct as a lot of people like. The question is, how does he deal with it now when he's asked? Monday, he said on Friday that he's prepared to have a press conference on Monday. We'll see if they still do that. And, of course, this will be a question that comes up then. But today, what does he say? No public events on his schedule at the moment.
You asked in the last segment, you know, is this a breaking point, basically, for Republicans? And the question I think that needs to be answered is like, okay, maybe, but a breaking point of what? Like, where will the break be? A breaking point where we talk about, you know, where our moral stance is on Twitter? Or a breaking point where it actually matters in terms of, you know, backing the president in various other things that he does and policy measures in places where it would actually matter in a day-to-day way. I mean, this matters. I'm not trying to say that, but like we're not in election season right now where there's actually people going to the polls.
We're getting closer by the day.
Yeah,
we're getting closer by the day.
It's still first year. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about tax reform. We're talking about a whole bunch. We're talking about the open questions of what's the end of the Russia probe. Does this affect any of that, which actually was what affects the president's safety in his tenure in a day-to-day way?
But I think you make a key point that this is a character test, a morality test of the president. The Republicans are pushing, saying, President, you failed this test yesterday. You failed the character test. You failed the morality test. They've also recently broken from him on policy issues. They don't trust him as a conservative. They think he tweets and does other things to undermine their negotiations. But there's the history. But as we continue the conversation, Manu brought up the Jake Tapper conversation about David Duke. This goes way back in the campaign, just to refresh your memory.
Will you unequivocally condemn David Duke and say that you don't want his vote or that of other white supremacists in this election?
Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about.
No, actually, we would want you to condemn. David Duke is very well known. You don't have to know him. You don't have to meet him. We know what he stands for and what he says. It's pretty easy to say, no, that has no place. There's that. And then remember the judge, the Mexican-American judge, who was overseeing the Trump University case. And again, it's the history that bothers a lot of Republicans.
He's a Mexican. We're building a wall between here and Mexico. The answer is, he is giving us very unfair rulings that people can't even believe. This is a case that should have ended. This judge is giving us unfair rulings. Now I say why. Well, I'm building a wall, okay? And it's a wall between Mexico, not another country.
But he's not from Mexico.
In my opinion,
he's from Indiana.
He's Mexican heritage, and he's very proud of it.
You try to step back. The Trump supporters out there watching are saying, you know, how dare you go back and pull all that up. Let's start from today. All that happened. Whether you agree with the president, whether you think he was misunderstood, whether you think that was taken out of context, why hasn't he learned a lesson? Understanding the world he lives in, and he's now the president of the United States.
And I think that the reason it's interesting and helpful to go back and play all those is because it reminds you that the pattern is always the same. Manu said it before. He gets caught saying something that gets a bad reaction, and then it goes days and days and days, and he sort of resists correcting it because he sees it as an attack on him and an admission of failure. And this is not a guy that admits failure or that says I'm sorry very, very easily. So I mean, I don't know that we should all be surprised that this goes for days.
It's a great point, because when he looked up yesterday and said not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama, to your point, that's when he made it about him, because he gets sensitive or defensive about these issues. Up next, the special counsel investigation turns a critical corner. A morning raid at the home of President's campaign chief, and now word key West Wing players are being asked for records and for interviews.
Allow you to pose questions you weren't able to.
Neo-Nazi and white nationalist protests turned deadly. There's bipartisan outrage. And this.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
Plus fire, fury, and more.
He will truly regret it, and he will regret it fast.
An escalating war of words with North Korea. And a big GOP family feud. The president blames the top Senate Republican for his stalled agenda.
I'm very disappointed in Mitch.
Inside Politics. The biggest stories sourced by the best reporters now.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. To our viewers in the United States and around the world, thanks for sharing your Sunday. It is a sad morning after in Charlottesville, Virginia. A federal civil rights investigation is opening now, and an Ohio man faces a state murder charge after a march by white supremacists turns deadly. President Trump is under fire for his response to the violence, adding to the spotlight he faces this week. The president interrupting his vacation to pick a trade fight with China as he grows frustrated that Beijing won't or can't do more to rein in North Korea's missile and nuclear programs. It's a gamble after a week of escalating Trump rhetoric that at times caught even his own national security team off guard.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Plus, there's no summer break for Republican dysfunction. Still without even one big legislative win, the president sidesteps any blame and lashes out at the Senate Majority Leader.
I'm very disappointed in Mitch. But if he gets these bills passed, I'll be very happy with it, and I'll be the first to admit it. But honestly, repeal and replace of Obamacare should have taken place.
We begin, though, with that state of emergency and the political fallout after Saturday's deadly violence following a march by white nationalists and neo-Nazis.
I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Talev of Bloomberg Politics, CNN's Manu Raju, Michael Scher of the New York Times, and Karen Demerjian of the Washington Post. What presidents say at big moments matters. Sometimes what they don't say matters just as much. Now, make no mistake, President Trump did condemn the deadly Charlottesville violence.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time.
But that many sides reference, put simply, failed the presidential test. And it is the source of remarkable condemnation this morning across the political spectrum. No, President Trump cannot be held responsible for the Trump campaign signs held by some of the white nationalist marchers, nor can he be held responsible for these words by one of America's best-known hate mongers.
This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump.
Clearly railed against President Obama for playing a lot of golf, but work can be done when you are on vacation. We know that. We saw President Obama do